Have you ever tried making something that seemed simple at first, only to realize it was much harder than you imagined? I've been there too, with epoxy resin. The first time I held a bottle of epoxy resin, I dreamed of creating a sparkling, magical lamp. But reality? It was a long series of mistakes, failures, and a lot of ruined resin. But without those failures, I might never have been able to create the beautiful lamps I make today. And this is my story, a journey filled with bubbles, sticky resin, and unforgettable lessons. When I first started making epoxy resin lamps, I thought as long as I had a mold, I just needed to pour resin and it would be done. But in reality, I made a lot of mistakes. Here are the lessons I learned from my painful failures. Choosing the wrong type of mold. Resin stuck, couldn't remove it. At first, I didn't realize that the type of mold is crucial. I used a hard plastic container, thinking, once the resin hardens, I can just pop it out, right? Not all molds are easy to remove. The resin stuck tightly to the mold, and when I tried to force it out, it either broke apart or got scratched. In the end, I had to cut the mold open just to get the piece out. To fix this, use a soft silicone mold for easier removal after the resin hardens. If using plastic or wooden molds, you must apply a non-stick layer with paint or adhere it to the mold surface. I was really excited to unbox the epoxy resin I just bought, watched a few tutorial videos online, and confidently thought, this is easy, but mixing the wrong ratio, stirring resin. Too vigorously causing air bubbles to appear like soda fizz, pouring resin. Too thick in one go, failing to control temperature, leading to overheating or slow curing, not measuring enough resin and running out midway, using the wrong pigments. Turning the final product into a disaster, and many more issues at this stage. Truly an epoxy nightmare for beginners. Every failure was discouraging. There were times I asked myself, am I really suited for this? But one thing kept me going, the feeling of seeing a perfectly crafted epoxy lamp, crystal clear and glowing like a piece of art. I couldn't give up. After countless failures, I made a decision. No more guesswork. I started reading more carefully, learning how to mix resin with the correct ratio, control temperature, and manage curing time. I focused on techniques such as pouring thin layers to prevent overheating, using a heat gun to remove air bubbles, and monitoring drying time to ensure crystal clear resin. I also became more creative. Rather than just pouring plain resin, I began experimenting with dried flowers, gemstones, and glow-in-the-dark mica, creating stunning visual effects. After all the effort of mixing resin, pouring it into the mold, and patiently waiting for it to cure, I was excited to remove the mold and see the final product. But instead of a perfect epoxy resin lamp, I ended up with a series of disasters. Here are the biggest mistakes I made when demolding epoxy resin. After several hours of waiting, I thought the resin was hard enough to remove from the mold. But as soon as I took it out, the surface was still sticky, deformed, and easily scratched. The top layer seemed solid, but the areas in contact with the mold or small gaps were still tacky. The first time I tried polishing epoxy resin, instead of a glossy finish, I ended up with a disaster. Today I'll share with you my journey, filled with mistakes, struggles, and lessons learned, so you can achieve a perfect, high-gloss epoxy resin lamp. Using the wrong type of sandpaper will only make it worse. At first, I thought I just needed to grab some sandpaper, sand it, and the resin would shine like a mirror. But, oh my god, why did it become cloudier the more I sanded? The biggest mistake was using sandpaper that was too coarse, which caused deep scratches on the resin surface. Then only using one type of sandpaper instead of progressing from coarse to fine grit, leaving visible scratches. And finally, sanding incorrectly, moving in just one direction instead of using circular motions. Excitedly grabbing the polishing machine, I thought that applying more pressure would make the resin shine faster. But then I discovered something terrifying. Using too much force while polishing can cause the resin to heat up and deform, or polishing one spot for too long can create burn marks or wave patterns on the surface. Polishing epoxy resin isn't just about making it shiny, it's an art. I've made mistakes, but each failure taught me something new. And if I can do it, so can you. After many failures, I've realized one thing. DIY is not just about creating a product, it's a journey. Each lamp is not just a decorative piece, but a culmination of time, effort, and passion. Keep experimenting, don't be afraid to make mistakes, and who knows, the next lamp you create might just be a masterpiece. Now, when I hold a completed epoxy resin lamp in my hands, I don't just see the shimmering light inside, I see my own journey. I'm not just creating a lamp, I'm creating stories. I'm not just doing DIY, I'm learning perseverance, creativity, and the art of never giving up. And I truly believe that if you're struggling with resin, if you've failed like I have, remember this: every mistake is a step closer to success.